For the last Sunday in September, you found the Georgia gang. Topping our agenda today, a presidential election. Not in Georgia, it's all about the schools. In Fulton County, huge pay raises. And Donald Trump up huge in Georgia. Some of the stories up for grabs on the Georgia gang.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia gang starts now.
We're glad you could be with us. We're not going to spend any time at all on the gas hysteria this past week. I guess it was hysteria because there was a brief gas shortage, but we're going to ignore that, okay? We're also going to declare this a Brangelina-free zone. That's not our stuff. We don't do it. I'm amazed that it's a top story on the networks. We are, however, going to talk about raw politics. We're going to start not with the presidential election, but with schools. Because if you turn on your television these days, it's all about Wall Street controlling schools or schools failing and needing intervention. So we talked about Hillary Clinton buying TV time in Georgia. That was a fake. She bought 1 week, nothing to it. However, there is a lot of money being spent on this Opportunity School District thing, which is a constitutional amendment on the November ballot. And Phil, I'll let you take it away. The anti-takeover folks appear to be funded by unions and national players. The governor's people are spending an equal amount of money, it appears, on the idea of taking over failing school districts and putting them under state supervision.
That's a fair analysis. I would say it's a temporary intervention for failing systems. The schools that are designated as failing, a lot of people ask, what do you mean by that? It's got to be 3 years or more if you're getting failing on the standardized tests, if your students have failed the standardized tests. I think that's fair. There's several options for this intervention. One of the options that a lot of people like, and it cuts across all political lines, is to perhaps turn that into a public charter school where you can maybe up those test scores. So you're right, it's on the ballot in November. I think all of us would urge people to do their homework on it. The two sides are up, as you point out, on TV, and I think it's going to be a close one.
Well, I can tell which one is anti-school takeover, Alexis, because it says Wall Street. Wall Street, oh my gosh, Wall Street. Only made America great. Couldn't it do it with the schools?
Well, that is an interesting metaphor that you're posing there. However, I think the main thing is local control over local schools, and that's the primary driver for the opposition to it. And it's primarily the school boards who are locally elected, and they want to represent their constituents. And the thing is, they have been trying to improve schools.
In certain places.
Well, in all places. The problem has been primarily some of the mitigating pressure to advance by so many percentage points each year, and of course that led to the Atlanta cheating scandal.
That's right.
But I think what is clear is that there are things that can be done both locally and with charters. I think Atlanta is approaching it this way. They are looking at the schools that are on that so-called failing list and are making efforts to see about getting some people, some public charters to take them over.
Hey, Jeff, this week the DeKalb School Board voted not unanimously to oppose the state constitutional amendment. They also extended Dr. Green, the superintendent's contract, by the way. But DeKalb is the system that has the most failing schools. People always look at Atlanta, but it's a big number in DeKalb. I believe it's 26 failing schools. And Dr. Green, the superintendent, has targeted them. Might be too late, though. I wonder why we hadn't been targeting those schools all along.
Well, I think that those schools have been looked at all along, even before Dr. Green got there and before the government. Well, I think that there have been sustained and repeated efforts to try to improve some of these schools, not just in DeKalb, but across the state.
Yes.
And yeah, you've got to applaud the governor, I think, for taking this on. The governor's taking on criminal justice reform. He's taking on education in a way that he sees a link between the two, and he wants to stop spending money on the criminal justice front and by investing in education, and wants to see these schools fixed. I can applaud that. I think that we can all applaud that. The question is whether or not state control equals better schools and more educated students. And I'm not so sure that there's any evidence, either in the state of Georgia or around the country, that that's the case. Now, it's an intractable problem, but if you're governor, you want to do whatever you can to solve it. And he's trying to do that.
Jeff, it is temporary, and when schools are turning around, then the state intervention ends. And I think the other argument, Alexis, to local control is we've had decades of local control, sadly, in DeKalb County, Clayton County, over in Richmond County, where the Atlanta school system, they haven't turned around.
Well, clearly, the issue is socioeconomics.
Well, it's also dysfunctional school boards,
It's
too.
not.
There's some dysfunctional school
Wait a minute,
boards.
but I mean, we talk about this as if it's a 10-year problem or a 20-year problem or a 30-year problem, and it's not.
Yes.
You know, we have a history in this state of not educating African Americans, and when we look at this, what we see are there are an awful lot of African Americans who are in these districts where there are a lot of OSU
It's an
students
insult
in
to
schools.
Alexis, by the way.
Well, no, I don't think it's an insult to anyone. The fact of the matter is that when we connect this to the history of intentionally miseducation or uneducating African Americans, it does have a generational effect, and we see it even today.
But
And
Jeff, you look at the Atlanta
generational
public school.
poverty,
Look at the
though.
Atlanta public school system where you have failing schools. What is it now, Dick? 14,000 per student in the Atlanta public school
Not
system.
quite, but close.
Almost. And so the money has been thrown there. Now, I understand your point about
The money needs to go to the
at least
families,
20
not to
at least
the
the 20 years
system.
there's been funding, and we still. I'm glad you're applauding the governor because let's try it.
Well, when you're governor of the state, you're frustrated. You want to be able to fix the problem, right? This is his attempt to fix a problem. I'm just not so sure that it's going to
Well,
get
you know,
right
look, in the case of DeKalb, just as a for instance, this governor was forced to fire the school board at one point because they were dysfunctional.
And picked better school board members by all accounts.
who didn't all get reelected. But the other point is, it reminds me of the old Lester Maddox quote about the state prison system.
Need a better-
If you want a better prison, get a better inmate. So I'm saying it is a socioeconomic issue. People in poverty are shown to not have the support they need at home to be able to advance and to
my
make
last thought on
progress.
this, the state PTA has come out against it and saying that this removes the parents from the equation. The parents won't have anyone to go to complain to, according to the piece by the president of the PTA. Well, right now, the parents aren't involved for all the socioeconomic reasons you're stating.
They
They're
got two
not-
jobs and they can't get there.
Well, and some of them just don't care, too.
Well, and
There may be
there is a
one or two
mechanism
in
for
that
complaints
who
too.
have
Well, of
that
course,
problem, and
it's a
some of
silly
them
argument.
are young children themselves, raising children.
The elephant in the room is the state teacher union bosses don't want this. They
National,
want
too, yeah.
They want kids locked into these
They're
failing
scared
schools.
to death a charter school
So-
might
Well, I don't think that
arise.
they want
don't-
kids locked into failing schools. They just,
They
I mean,
don't.
I think that there is a legitimate argument here about local versus state control. We've always had this concern when it comes to education. Conservatives have argued about there being a federal Department of Education and that the feds ought not have any role in education because it's a local concern. And I think that that's a legitimate argument on the state level as well.
All right, we've taken too much time on this. Now I'm going to shortchange another topic. Phil, I owe you an apology. I've kind of teased you a little bit about this business with the Judicial Qualifications Commission being total inside baseball. It's starting to take shape now, and even I am starting to understand it. You went to the hearing this week. It looks like one man who was a member of the school board, who was previously their the JQC, I'm sorry, and previously their investigator, he's been putting judges away, and now he says the board isn't really doing that.
That's right. There's a series of hearings at the state capitol on the judicial watchdog agency, the JQC, Judicial Qualifications Commission. The hero of the week has been Richard Hyde, as you say, a former investigator, longtime investigator for this agency, now on the commission, which he says is, quote, an embarrassment, unquote. And I'll get to that in a second, we can discuss. But Hyde, this is incredible. Dozens of judges have resigned, almost some of them on the spot.
Yeah.
After JQC
When they
approved
saw his car pull on the
investigations.
lot.
I mean, one judge, Hyde did chapter and verse. One judge almost committed suicide. He was so ashamed of himself in the chambers when he was confronted. Another judge admitted to attacking women in his chambers. It's crazy. Think of it, dozens over the last 10 years have been removed. Now Hyde says it's gotten political over the last 2 years. It's been dysfunctional. There's no investigator, there's no director, and there's no process for complaints.
Right. It's just a story that my apologies to you. You were out ahead of me on that one. There were some other state issues, but we're not going to get to them because we want to turn to the local news. We're going to do that in just a minute, including huge salary raises for employees of Fulton County, but it might screw up their welfare benefits. But we're going to do it anyway. Stay with us.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Visit their website at fox5atlanta.com.
Fulton County this week took a major step toward the goals of Occupy Wall Street. The county commission voted to give huge pay raises to a minimum of $31,000 a year for the county's lowest paid employees. Interesting in the debate that part of it involved the fact that the pay raises might cause people to lose their welfare benefits.
Yeah.
Because they got too much money.
Right, because they're being so ridiculously underpaid.
So wouldn't it
Again,
be
this is the argument that we've been having about economic growth, right? And when we look at these quarterly numbers and you say, you know, GDP is up just 1.1%, and the reason why is because we have this huge income disparity, and we have people who are making, you know, sub-poverty level wages, right? And who are working full-time jobs and still qualifying for welfare benefits. That's a problem. And I think that that's why you've seen calls for a higher minimum wage. You look at the minimum wage now, it's around $7.50. And if you look at it on an inflation-adjusted basis, it's considerably lower than that. You know, I understand what the real minimum wage is. It's zero. It's the wage of not having a job. But we need to be able to get money in the hands of people so that we can get our economy humming again, and they can actually work at a livable wage.
Right.
Well, but
Government was never intended in this republic to provide, quote, a living wage, unquote.
no, of course not.
Well, it was always intended to endorse slavery.
No, that's ridiculous.
Come on.
Nothing to do
So
with it.
I'm thinking, though.
We're talking about our economic
the
system.
Fulton County plan is to make the minimum salary or $31,000 a year, an annual salary. Now, if you are trying to support a family, that's still not a lot of money. That's not, you know, rent, food, expenses. So it's
Maybe the level of welfare benefits are set too high.
Well,
What?
No, I don't think that that's the case at all. I mean, they're usually set at some percentage of the poverty level or the
Right.
median income for a particular metropolitan region. And when you look at that, you know, you've got to admit that it's not really fair for somebody to be working 40 hours a week and not being able to make ends meet and still qualify for food stamps or housing benefits
or
Well,
Medicaid.
or Medicaid.
Prediction, all the other salaries are going up. Because this went to 31, all the salaries above that, you're going to see this commission raising them to keep pace. I'm not sure that's a good thing. The Newton Mosque, I know you all talked about this last week in my absence, went away. The moratorium ended. A handful of crazy protesters, that's it. It's over. The mosque is going to happen in Miami County.
The one issue that isn't over, though, is the influx of refugees that are coming into Georgia and other states. And I saw just the other day where the governor of Texas pulled out of the federal resettlement program. We ought to do it here. And he said this, we can't tell who are the good refugees and who are the refugees that could do us harm. And I think it's a good point.
Like Donald Trump Jr. and
The
his analogy to Skittles. You know,
So
if
you
there are
don't want to
three
vet. You don't want to vet refugees.
They are
You don't want to
vetted.
eat the whole.
They are not vetted.
No.
They are not vetted.
Are vetted,
I think
Phil.
there
The
was,
FBI says they are not being vetted properly. Are they lying?
Properly. That means that doesn't
means
mean
they're missing
that
some.
means they're missing documentation, but it doesn't mean they're not being
So
vetted.
don't let
but
them
they
in
are,
willy-nilly is the point.
They're not letting them in
Well,
willy-nilly. Sometimes it
you're
takes
in denial.
18 months. I'm not in denial.
Well,
I'm
I
telling
think
you
there's a
what is
distinction to
going
be made
on.
here that's worth making. Syrian refugees are being vetted.
they are, and it's taking years to.
Taking several years to get them all
That's right.
into the system.
But the FBI warns that we have got to have a pause here. We can't
But
do it all.
refugees from other lands, from Africa and other countries, are not necessarily going through the same vetting process.
As Syrian refugees. On the other hand, you have countries like Canada. You go to a city like Toronto, which is taking in more Syrian refugees than any other nation on earth, and you don't have a single problem. You don't have a single bombing. You don't have a single terrorist attack
'cause they're so
in
nice.
Quebec or in Montreal or Toronto or wherever. So it's because
think that's
maybe
a
it's because they're so
generalization.
welcoming. That's exactly
no,
right.
Canadians are
it's
very
because they're
nice.
so welcoming.
What's wrong with
Right.
having safe spaces, Jeff, in the Mideast or in other areas near their home countries? A lot of the refugees, want to have that. And I think the American people would generously pay to have safe spaces in the Mideast.
Just put them in a
and
tent
elsewhere.
somewhere out in the desert.
No,
Okay.
hopefully we can resolve this Syrian war that Obama has screwed up.
Obama didn't screw this up.
Yes,
He's
he
trying
did.
to prevent it. He's
Obama
trying
and
to-
Hillary Clinton messed it up.
If he tried to prevent it, he failed.
This started,
John Kerry
this started
said this
15
week they
years
failed.
ago with George
Right.
W. Bush going into
Obama's
Iraq.
Secretary of
This has
State this
been
week
in
said
the
they
making
failed
for
to
years
end
and years
the war.
and years.
Let me change the subject to another form of tension that's kind of amusing. Traffic to the Braves games. So in Sandy Springs over by Riverside Drive this past week, there was a community meeting. It said it lasted 5 hours, Phil,
Right.
with Mayor Rusty Paul on the spot with
Right.
Sandy Springs residents who don't want to be a cut through for traffic to the new SunTrust Park when it opens next year.
That's right. You know, the SunTrust Park is right over the Fulton County line into Cobb County, and Mayor Paul ran most of the public forum. You had Commissioner Bob Ott from Cobb County there, that's his district, who was very blunt in his assessment that a lot of things weren't planned out. Well, of course, we all knew that. Everybody on the gang has been talking about that. Mayor Paul didn't come out too well. He got beat up a lot. There was a lot of anger there. We still don't know all of the plans for traffic congestion, how Sandy Springs law enforcement is going to handle things. And Mayor Paul said we might have these slip exits, although the DOT representative there says, well, we don't have any money for that. So we're still waiting, as we've all talked about, for
Right, and
the rest of the
and
plans.
the cranes are out there, and the building continues, and they're building ramps and
Next April is
all
opening
kinds
day.
of stuff going on. So
Yeah,
we'll
and
see
the
what
shopping
happens.
center around it, the shopping district, entertainment district, is taking shape very nicely. One last story about DeKalb and its continuing dysfunction. The county this week voted to put a halt, a moratorium on water disconnections. Now, it's one of those things where you really mess things up, then you turn around and sort of stick it to yourself. Because now people really don't have to pay their water bills if they're out of threat of being disconnected. But DeKalb's water bills, I can say just as a customer, are wildly varying. You really don't trust it when you get your bill, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I
sad
think they
thing. They
want to
gotta
fix
fix it.
that before they start cutting off people's water. It makes sense.
Yeah, I know.
You
I
want
was
to make sure that,
teasing.
yeah, okay.
And so that's fine. All right, when we come back, we will talk about sort of a weird thing, an issue in the U.S. Senate race. Can you find a cap made in Georgia? Burning question of our time when we return.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Visit their website at fox5atlanta.com.
Before we turn to the politics of the day, let me make this observation that I think helps an argument I've made for years. Georgians are voting right now. We are about, 50 days away from the election. Georgians are voting by absentee ballot, early voting soon to start. The first presidential debate has not even been conducted. That comes Monday night against our Falcons, by the way. But people are voting.
I think over a third
It's
of
wrong.
Americans will vote before November 8th.
Well,
That's wrong.
But I also think it inures to Hillary Clinton's
Benefit?
thank you, because she has the ground game that Trump seems to lack, and a lot of the early votings are coming in on
I
the
think it
Democratic
evens
side.
out because all political scientists say some of the most reliable voters over the last 25 years are conservative Republicans. So I think it evens out. I don't know
Well,
who gets a leg
I
up.
think people voting before the first presidential debate.
That has been some of the early analysis.
Suppose, just heaven forbid this happens. Suppose during the debate Hillary Clinton collapses.
Well, it is far too early.
It's just too early.
Suppose
It's far too
Donald
early to
Trump's
vote.
head explodes.
Or Donald Trump's head explode. Either way, it's wrong. Now, let me turn to this Senate race in Georgia. It's very strange. We have Jim Barksdale, who's an unknown Democrat, challenging Johnny Isakson. And he's unknown, so he's got to do some things that are different. And I got to say, he's different. Jim Barksdale has a commercial now where he wears that cap of his and challenges people to find a cap made in Georgia. Now, I haven't had time.
Well, the point that he's making is he's campaigning against the trade deals, and he's saying that they've not been good for Georgia, and that you can't find anything made in America anymore. I mean, that's his point. That
Well,
he's
it
making,
occurred to
but-
me that he is campaigning on the one hand as Donald Trump, against trade deals,
Right.
and as Bernie Sanders against capitalism.
I think that's true. I think he's far more to the left than Michelle Nunn and Jason Carter, who ran as Democrats 2 years ago. There's no question about
And he's
that.
a capitalist.
Well,
Yeah, of course he's a capitalist because he's some kind of
Barksdale
bazillionaire.
City didn't like capitalism.
I know, but he is one.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's hypocrisy as usual.
Now,
Oh,
Johnny
please.
Isaacson, on the other hand, I think is a very clever strategy. He ran the first commercial, which was a heartstrings one, about the young lady who died serving in the Peace Corps.
Right.
Now he's got an effective commercial that I think has a two-pronged approach. Number one, he criticizes President Obama's cash payout of ransom to the Iranians.
Which it was not, but
And,
that's the way it's
yeah,
been
it was
characterized.
roll that cash up, put it on a plane, send it to Switzerland. But it also makes the point that Johnny Isaacson fought all those years to get benefits for the American hostages held in Iran under Jimmy Carter. It's a very effective commercial on two fronts. Do you agree?
I think that Johnny Isaacson is trying to avoid a runoff, and that is an
You bet.
amazing thing to say. That he would be in that situation where he is trying to avoid a runoff, trying to get 50+1 in this election and not go into a runoff. That's pretty amazing. He is a very popular senator. He is the senior senator. He's been there for, I can't tell you how many years in the U.S. Senate, and even longer in politics, for decades. And he's facing a runoff. And you've got to tie that around the neck of Donald Trump.
No, you got to tie it to the fact that we sometimes forget that there's a lot of new people that have moved into this state over the last 4 to 6 years that don't know who a lot of these people are. It has nothing to do with Trump or anything else. Now, I will say this, that the millennials, both parties are trying to get them interested in all sorts of campaigns, including this one. So I think it's, as we all have agreed, it's turnout.
Yeah.
Yeah, and let's not eliminate the thought of the libertarian in the race. Alan Buckley has been running for libertarian offices for as long as most Georgians can remember.
Right, and they always poll around 4% or so.
Right, and the
they-
libertarian candidate did cause a very famous runoff in the U.S. Senate between Paul Coverdell and Weiss Fowler.
That's right.
So Isaacson is concerned.
And also with Saxby Chambliss later on. But Jeff, to your point, Trump, I know you're upset about this, but Trump is now up again in Georgia in various polls.
Oh, I'm not upset about it, nor am I surprised about it. I mean, we've
Okay.
got a long history here of that kind of politics.
So that'll help Johnny Isaacson.
Right.
Well, and
Last-
the interesting thing too on the libertarian front is that the Libertarian Party seems to be taking the votes away from the Democrat rather than the Republican this time. Which
All right,
is
last
an
thought on
interesting
that.
development.
Quinnipiac poll, Trump ahead 7 points in Georgia. That's the way I thought things would be. Seems to be settling in. No more Hillary commercials in Georgia. So it seems Georgia's been conceded to the Republicans. And by the way, Jeff, you mentioned Johnny Isaacson is right at 50%
Right.
in the latest polls. So when we come back, I guess we're not going to have time to talk about Black Lives Matter's protests in Atlanta. As long as they stay off the expressway, it's fine. And when we come back, golly, winners and losers already.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
And we'll begin that today with you, Jeff.
Thank you, Dick. I want to salute the Partnership for Southern Equity and its CEO, Nathaniel Smith. They issued a report on, income disparity in the metro region this week, and it is all just as bad as we thought it was. It's actually worse in Atlanta than it is in cities across the nation, and it's something that we have to address. Meanwhile, the very next day, the Economic Policy Institute came out with a study that showed that African-American men's wages relative to white men is lower today in 2016 than it was in 1979. And so we got a lot of work to do.
Regardless of college education.
That's regardless of college education, that's right. And so that's a problem that needs to be addressed.
All right, Alexis.
Okay, the African American Museum opens on the Mall in D.C. this weekend, and there's lots of Atlanta connections, one being John Lewis, of course, who labored so many years to see that it got built. And then Atlanta's own H.J. Russell and Company was part of the construction of this fabulous facility that people need to see. And then I want to salute Carol Ashkenaz Kay. She passed this week. She was the first woman to be on the editorial board of the Atlanta Constitution. She was a dear friend and a great journalist, and she'll be missed.
And my graduate school classmate at Columbia. No
Right.
class could have produced two people with political views more different than mine and Carol Ashken.
How about that? How
All
about
right,
that?
Phil, go ahead.
Well, speaking of different political viewpoints, I want to salute the Arthur Blank Family Foundation. Of course, he does so much
had that on the
for
list,
the
too.
city in Georgia, but I didn't realize they had a speaker series, and I would recommend folks checking that out. Secondly, I like Donald Trump's suggestion that maybe some cities ought to do stop and frisk. It worked so well under both a liberal and a conservative mayor in New York City.
Although it was ruled unconstitutional.
No, it
but
wasn't.
go
That
ahead.
judge actually was removed
was a
from the
rogue
case.
judge.
A rogue- oh,
That
excuse
judge
me.
was removed from the
Okay.
case. It's not unconstitutional, and we could do that in Atlanta. And also a shout out to Atlanta's former mayor and kind of the unofficial mayor of Buckhead, Sam Massell. Can you believe this? He got, God bless him, he got married at age 89.
Susan Gordy.
Susan Gordy, and we wish the couple well.
Yeah, and he said he might toss his hat in the ring. You know what?
You might
He wouldn't be
go
a
back
bad
and be
mayor.
mayor again, right.
Sam Massell. All right, we're getting a quick wrap here. So I'll note that the Falcons are on Monday Night Football against New Orleans, in New Orleans. And of course, there's something else going on at the same time, and that's the presidential debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And I join you, Alexis, in thanking the staff at Emory Midtown Hospital. Our families, you and me, have had a lot of time there lately, and so we thank them for their great work. See you next week on the Georgia Gang.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.